trying to promote a better world, better future for all of us. Today we are joined with Patrick Starnes, who is running for governor of Oregon. Patrick, thank you for being here with us.
Thanks for having me, Jose. Good morning.
Good morning. I appreciate you taking the time to speak with us today about your campaign in Oregon. We've looked into your background. That you ran as an independent candidate for the governorship of Oregon in 2018, the recent election. You came in third place, behind the two major party candidates as an independent. This time around, you are running as a Democrat, as my understanding. Is it your intention to reform the party, or why run as a Democrat this time?
Yeah, I think it is time to reform the Democratic Party in Oregon. I used to be the secretary of a county Democratic Party down in Roseburg, where I grew up in Douglas County. I was the secretary of the Douglas County Democrats. But when Newt Gingrich and Clinton passed NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, I left the party, and I was a non-affiliated voter for 20 years. But when Biden signed, well, January 6th was a turning point for a lot of us to come back to the Democratic Party, and 6,000 Oregonians left the Republican Party, including my former opponent, Dr. Bueller, who was the Republican at 2018 governor's race. He left the Republican Party too. So that had a big change of a lot of people's hearts and minds. And the final thing was when Biden signed the end of the XL pipeline. I really felt like maybe the Democrats were becoming less corporate, and we're going to find out if that's true in Oregon, because we have two big corporate Democrats I'm running against, but we just need the largest third of the progressive vote to win the governor's primary this May 17th.
Interesting. We always love uncovering the stories across America. These policies, in our history do impact communities, in so many ways. And, to your point, one of the things that caught our interest was campaign finance reform. And, that being a big major policy plank on your platform. Can you speak a little bit, now that, you kind of articulated, you want the Democrats to be a little less corporate. What do you hope for in campaign finance reform?
Well, I think the country considers Oregon a very progressive state because we've had the vote by mail for over 20 years. But what they'll find surprising is we're one of 5 states with no contribution limits whatsoever. So sky's the limit, and that's the problem we found in the 2018 governor's race. It was like $40 million my two opponents raised. And it ended up in the last week of the campaign endorsing the incumbent Democratic governor because she agreed finally to amend the Constitution in Oregon, which we did in 2020 with 78% of the vote, Jose. It was out of the ballpark, Wow. So it's a bipartisan issue that regardless of urban or rural, young or old, or Republican or Democrat, everyone, obviously 78%, almost 80% support campaign finance reform. So that's sadly what didn't happen the next session in 2021, right after that big success, was that the former speaker, who's one of my opponents in this race, they didn't set the limits. I mean, right after a mandate, you should have heard the people clearly and said, okay, let's set some limits. And what we're doing is role modeling it in our campaign. We're not taking any corporate money or any PAC monies, and we put $1,000 limit, which is high for people like us that make 5 figures. But there are some supporters that make 6 figures, so they get to add an extra zero to their support. But most of our donations are $100 or less.
Wow. And we're really happy to see populist policies actually gain traction and hopefully come to fruition. My background, I work in education, but I also studied urban planning and policy. And Portland is like this model city of good policy, that's winning out. And, the material reality, which is always good to see. But to your point, there is this concern of a lot of money influencing local politics. And the major issue, at least where I'm at here in Illinois and Chicago, has been our response to COVID And I feel like Oregon might have fared a little better than most states, but I don't know what your hopes and moving forward from COVID or with COVID looks like.
Well, I supported our governor not only because of the constitutional amendment, but because she was pretty quick in doing the mandates and mask mandates and even closures of small business. Of course, they weren't popular, but it's like a no-win situation. You have these terrible death rates, or you have this frustration with masks and closures. The difference about Oregon, California, and Washington is we're part of the Pacific Rim, so we're part of the Asia international situation. So we don't have the luxury like South Dakota of having no international airport. There's less than 1 million people in South Dakota with no international airport. And Portland, as you mentioned, is a major hub, along with Seattle and San Francisco, of course. But the two big takeaways for me are that vaccines save lives and masks matter. So that has been my steady, clear message. And we may be out of the woods on this one, but my wife's a biologist, and she says with globalization the way it is across the world, we'll probably have another pandemic. And so that's why I'm the only candidate. Oregon has this kicker, which is a rebate to the taxpayers if we meet our goal with the budget. Mm-hmm. So if Oregon reaches its goal, then there's this kicker rebate to the taxpayers. But what I would argue is that we need to put that kicker into a emergency crisis fund, because if it doesn't help us with COVID, or another pandemic that could be down the road, it could help us with the wildfires and droughts that we're having because of climate change. So we need to have an emergency crisis fund. And as you can see in the map behind me, we're scheduled to have a major earthquake, over a 9.5 earthquake along the whole West Coast. So if we have collapsed bridges, collapsed cell towers, some water lines breaking, this is another reason we need to have an emergency crisis fund and use the kicker for that.
I see that. So preparing for pandemic disaster, for climate disaster, for this earthquake disaster. This was initially something that I was going to bring in, but what other preparation policies are you kind of hoping to get Oregon ready for that you feel like your opponents are missing?
Well, my promise, my promise is in the first 100 days to set those contribution limits. The legislature has to do that work, but I would build the table and have them come to the table, both parties, not just the supermajority that we enjoy here in Oregon, but have the Republicans come, because we have this problem where if the Republicans don't like it, they can break the quorum by walking out of the Capitol. So we need to have them at the table to solve the contribution limits, so we can finally have some contribution limits in Oregon. Because like I said before, we're one of 5 states where sky's the limit. We have Phil Knight donating millions of dollars in the last election, and other wealthy corporations and special interest PACs. And that's why we're banning those. And that's what I hope the legislation would do. Mm-hmm. But after that 100 days, there's a couple different important issues. You mentioned urban planning and Portland being a model, but it's also sadly under the recent speaker, and my other big opponent is the state treasurer. We've seen increased homelessness, and no one's really addressing that. So I'm the only candidate who's put together a concrete plan. I call it the Oregon Shelter Fund, because the state hasn't been a big partner in solving this problem. You can get some federal dollars, and you can get some state and county money, or city and county monies, but the state hasn't been a partner. So now with the Oregon Shelter Fund, we could be a substantial partner. And whenever I come up with a fund that requires money, I feel responsible to have a revenue source. And what I propose, and you may see this in Chicago too, we have zombie homes, old abandoned homes around different communities and around the state, even in the rural areas, that we'd have a vacancy fee on those homes to put pressure to get those homes ready for people to live in. Because often, as you may know, they're owned by big banks, wealthy banks from out of state, and they're just using it as a tax write-off, as it depreciates. So we need to get two things. We need to put pressure on them to get those homes back into activity, and also raise the revenue so we can have the mini homes and shelter services for the unhoused. We have 15,000 Oregonians that are unhoused, Jose,
Wow.
and
Wow.
and most of them are in Portland and the other big cities. But even in the rural areas, because I'm one of the only candidates also who's traveled the whole map you see behind me, all
Yeah.
36 counties, and we see it's another issue besides campaign finance reform that the homeless issue is a unifying issue, and also healthcare would be the next project after we tackle homelessness, because we have almost 300,000 Oregonians who are working who
Hmm.
are uninsured with healthcare. They make too
Yeah.
much to be on OHP, which is our Oregon Health Plan, which helps children and low income people have health insurance. But their employer doesn't cover their health insurance. So as my wife and I know, it's really expensive to buy your own health insurance if you're self-employed. So we need to have OHP for all, is what I call it, sort of like Medicare for all, and
Nice.
that would cover all these folks and help us with mental health issues. The
Yeah.
seniors that I meet really like the plan because Medicare doesn't cover vision and dental the way our OHP for all would do. So it would even be more comprehensive. We'd take that federal money from Medicare and Medicaid and put it in, again, it should be a separate fund called the Oregon Health Fund. And we'd also have a corporate tax, a wealth tax, and a sin tax on junk food, which is one of the things that's, creating diabetes, heart disease, and obesity,
Oh, wow. So many of these policies that you're speaking to are like dream policies, that I've been hoping to have just here in Chicago. They've been trying to tax $1 million condos, for like to have homeless funding, like housing funding. And I often feel like that's why I need to ask you this question about like social movements in America tend to influence the conversation and our politics and our policy sometimes. And sorry about that feedback.
I didn't hear it, so it's fine.
Sorry. So, I feel like, especially the way that our schools seem to be politicized a bit, the way that these trucker convoys seem to be having more social demands than material demands, as governor, as someone that's campaigning for governor, and now, what are you hoping to drive home messaging to, they mentioned a lot of unified issues from homelessness, alleviation to getting 300,000 Oregonians, working Oregonians on healthcare. What message-wise, though, I feel like social movements become like the fuzz, around the hard, real things that we're looking for that tend to curve us away from them becoming a reality. How do what message do you hope to send to Oregonians to unify them around your platform?
Right. Well, obviously, the extreme right is using these crises that we're under as an organizing tool for the 2024 presidential race. I mean, that's really clear. It's coast to coast. They're using the mask mandates in the schools. They're using critical race theory. They're using the trucker convoys. All of these things as organizing tools, and there's probably big money behind that. So I think that's another reason why campaign finance reform is important, because it helps. If we, in Oregon, as an example, if we take this big money off the backs of these senators, state senators, and state representatives, then they're not doing the corporate work that those donors are expecting or the special interests are expecting. Now they have to do the people's work, right? Because that's who's going to be donating small donations to get them reelected. So it's not just about the governor's race, it's about a systemic change in the capital, because sadly in Oregon, because we have no limits, the reason you get to be a chair of a committee like the healthcare committee is because you raise the most money, not because you're like a former doctor or maybe you were a nurse in your other life, or you have the seniority to be the chair of the healthcare committee. No, it's because you raise the most money, and currently the big pharma and the health insurance industry, they donate to both sides. So all the members on the healthcare committee get the largest donations from big pharma and the health insurance. And so all of that has to be gone so that we can have us unify us around the people's issues, because then it won't matter if you're Republican or Democrat or urban or rural or young or old, we'll all be insured, health insurance. And what's cool about OHP for All is it's transferable. So maybe you work in the private sector like I do as a construction worker, and then I become a teacher in the public sector. My health insurance would transfer with me. Or if I go back to school and get my master's degree, it would cover me as a student. So that's what's important, is to unify folks around these common issues and start having shared success, which are bipartisan success. And so there's less animosity, because then Oregonians feel like, hey, we're in this together. And another big thing, I know you don't have this problem back east as much, is the wildfires, which are now not just affecting rural communities, but they're smoking out the big cities. And so that's another common issue, and along with droughts. And so even if we have climate deniers, they can unify around dealing with the wildfires. And I'm one of the only rural Democrats that's running in the race too, because both of my opponents are up in the big metro area, Portland. And so and that's why it's important I travel all over the state, because, you know, the majority of the population is right in Portland, but, you know, there's six congressional districts. We have 6 now. We have a new one because Oregon has this unique thing that the Rust Belt, where you live, we have 40,000 new people coming every year, Jose, to Oregon. So that's a small city in Oregon. So every year, and that's why we have extra pressure on our housing. And that's why it's so important that we get all the housing units into activity. And we have, you mentioned the $1 million condos. We have a similar problem along the coast because of the tourism, or up in the mountains by the ski resorts. We have nice summer homes and lots of Airbnbs, but we don't have a lot of worker housing for the folks that are going to change those beds at the Airbnbs, or pump your gas, or work at your restaurant. So not only do we need to help those 15,000 Oregonians that have no housing, but we also have to help our working families have affordable housing, so they can, because, you know, we have a pretty unique minimum wage system in our state. I don't know if you're familiar with it. No. It's a three-tiered system, where the rural areas, especially like in Eastern Oregon, is one level, and then the middle cities are another level, and then Portland and the high populated areas are higher minimum wage, which I think would have been really popular as a national model to use that. You know, yeah. But raising all the minimum wages is important, regardless. And I do not buy into this whole thing that raising these wages has caused the inflation, because the oil industry saw record profits. So it's just simple greedy gouging is what's going on, you know. And we've seen the oil production sustain. So it hasn't been a shortage or a scarcity issue. It's just, you know, they feel that they can gouge us, and they're doing it. Same with other costs, you know.
Yeah, at a time when major corporations are seeing opportunity to raise in profits, it's nice to hear from people like yourself that are running for office, champion policies to bring, you know, equity and you know, actual movements in life to the common people. You know, to really wrap this up on a positive note, we understand you've hit your fundraising goal for the quarter. So we wanted to celebrate that with you. Don't know where you went, but wanted to celebrate that with you. And, you know, we know that the primary is coming up in May. So I'm not sure if you consider yourself a front runner, but I hope that everything's going well. And, you know, how do you hope to keep that momentum, you know, heading into the primary?
Well, we had 2 fundraising goals. It cost quite a big chunk of change to get in the voters pamphlet. Since Oregon has a vote by mail, Jose, we get a month before the election, we get this booklet that explains all the candidates and all the ballot measures. So it's cool that Oregonians have a chance to study the candidates and the ballot measures ahead of time, and then they mail in their ballot ahead of time if they want. But then at May 17th at 8 o'clock, you have to turn it in or you miss out. But so we raised that, and now we're matching our goal to get the door-to-door literature. And that's the important thing about a people-powered campaign like ours versus when you have big corporate donations, like from Comcast. Comcast won't go door-to-door for you. Comcast won't write letters to the editor, and Comcast won't do phone banking for you. So that's the difference when you have a grassroots effort like we do across all 36 counties. You have a people-powered election, and we may not be the front runner, but like I said at the beginning, the two corporate Democrats can fight with their big money, and then we just need the largest third, which is the most progressive and greenest Oregon Democrats to win the primary.
Amazing. Well, how can people at home that are watching right now get involved? Where can they learn more, and how can they donate to your campaign?
Well, the easiest way is my webpage is starnes2022.com, and that's spelled Starnes. If I had time, I would put it on your chat here, maybe. Maybe Adam can post it. But because we'll have my personal cell phone, which I'm recording this Zoom call with, and my personal email. So I'm happy. I answer my own phone. I answer my own emails. I feel it's important that I have direct connection with not only people that are trying to find out and ask difficult questions, because I'm not afraid of the difficult questions, and I think it's important that we have concrete solutions rather than platitudes about, oh, I'm really concerned about the homeless, and I'm really concerned about climate change. Because when you go to my webpage, for one, we have a platform button, which is, for one bizarre reason, is rare in this election. But we also have concrete solutions where we talk about, what we're going to do about it. Because people are tired of hearing about, oh, we're really worried about that. But now, the tough question is, then what are you going to do about it? And like Elizabeth Warren says, we have a plan for that.
Well, I definitely encourage everyone, please check out Starnes2022.com. We'll include the website on our links below. It's this platform just has viable solutions for Oregon, that should be implemented no matter what happens. But we're rooting for you here at TCSM. Patrick, thanks again for spending Sunday here with us.
Well, thanks, and thanks for having all these great interviews. I've seen a few of them from around the country, and that's so cool that you're highlighting the progressives for change. So,
well, thank you,
and thanks, Adam, for being the production engineer. So,
we really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yep. Talk to you soon.